The message landed on Eisenhower's desk like a slap. Not a polite request. Not a justification. A report. General George S. Patton had taken 500,000 gallons of fuel without authorization. In the middle of a war where fuel meant life or death, where entire divisions were stalled for lack of gasoline, Patton didn't ask. He didn't wait. He simply took it, diverting massive fuel reserves to keep his Third Army moving east toward Germany, toward glory. Eisenhower leaned back in his chair and stared at the paper. This wasn't theft in the civilian sense. This was something far more dangerous. Because Patton was right. And because Patton was wrong. Outside Eisenhower's headquarters, the Allied war machine was grinding, straining, screaming for supplies. Trucks sat empty. Tanks were silent. Infantry waited while the German army regrouped behind rivers and fortifications. Logistics, not bravery, now decided who would win World War II in Europe. And Patton had just broken the rules that held the entire alliance together. He had stolen fuel meant for others. Fuel promised to British commanders. Fuel allocated by Eisenhower himself. 500,000 gallons. Enough to change the war. Enough to tear the Allied command apart. Eisenhower understood immediately what this meant. Not just militarily, politically. He wasn't only a general. He was the glue holding together Americans, British, Free French, egos, nations, and rival commanders who barely trusted each other. And Patton, brilliant, aggressive, uncontrollable Patton, had once again forced Eisenhower into an impossible position. Punish him and risk slowing the most successful offensive in Europe. Ignore it and signal that orders no longer mattered. This wasn't the first time Patton had crossed a line. But this time he hadn't slapped a soldier. He hadn't insulted allies. He had rewritten the battlefield with stolen fuel. Eisenhower picked up his pen. What he would say next would determine more than Patton's career. It would decide how this war would be fought, by rules or by results. And for the first time since D-Day, Eisenhower hesitated. By September 1944, the war in Western Europe had reached a strange and dangerous moment. The Allies had broken out of Normandy faster than anyone expected. German defenses had collapsed across France. Paris was liberated. Enemy units were retreating in chaos. On maps in Allied headquarters, arrows pushed east in confident sweeps of red and blue ink. But the arrows were lying. The real battlefield was no longer fought with bullets and shells, it was fought with gasoline. Every mile the army's advance stretched supply lines thinner. The ports were still damaged. Railways were wrecked. Trucks ran non-stop along the Red Ball Express, burning fuel just to deliver fuel. A tank without gasoline was nothing more than steel scrap. A division without fuel was a sitting target. Eisenhower knew this better than anyone. Supreme Commander meant he didn't just fight Germans, he fought math, tonnage, distances, allocations, promises, and everyone wanted more. Patton's army on a leash. George S. Patton's Third Army was the sharpest blade the Allies had. It moved fast, struck hard, and terrified the Germans. Patton believed in relentless motion. Never stop, never let the enemy regroup. His doctrine was simple: speed is mercy. But speed drank gasoline like water. By late August, Patton's tanks were running dry. His division sat poised for breakthroughs that couldn't happen because fuel trucks weren't arriving. Meanwhile, other Allied forces, particularly Montgomery's in the north, were receiving priority for operations like Market Garden. Patton saw it as madness. From his perspective, the Germans in front of him were broken. One sustained push could crack them completely. He believed the war could be ended before winter if he was allowed to keep moving. Instead, he was told to wait. Patton did not wait well. The moment of decision. Somewhere between frustration and certainty, Patton made his choice. He found fuel allocated elsewhere, fuel not meant for him, and redirected it. Not a little. Not quietly. 500,000 gallons. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. Orders were overridden. Paperwork was rewritten. Trucks changed routes. Officers were pressured. The fuel flowed south into Third Army depots, and Patton's tanks roared back to life. Within days, his forces surged forward again, smashing through German units that hadn't expected an attack. Prisoners were taken. Towns fell. The front moved. From a purely tactical standpoint, it worked. From a command standpoint, it was a nightmare. Eisenhower finds out. Eisenhower was not a man given to theatrics. He did not shout often. He did not pound desks. His power came from restraint. But when the reports reached him, confirmed, undeniable, his reaction was cold fury. Patton hadn't just taken fuel. He had taken authority. In a coalition war that was deadly. British commanders were already suspicious of American dominance. Montgomery believed his operations deserved priority. De Gaulle watched for any sign of American disregard. Eisenhower's entire role depended on fairness, or at least the appearance of it. And Patton had blown a hole straight through that balance. If Eisenhower let this stand, every commander would start doing the same. Hoarding, redirecting, disobeying. The Allied front would become a free-for-all. If he punished Patton publicly, morale would suffer. Worse, Patton might be right. That was the poison in the situation. The brutal truth Eisenhower couldn't ignore. Eisenhower was not blind to results. Patton's gamble had produced victories. German units in his sector were collapsing. Intelligence confirmed that resistance ahead of Third Army was weaker than expected. Patton's instincts, as infuriating as they were, had once again proven sharp. But Eisenhower also saw the bigger picture. Montgomery needed fuel for Market Garden. Bradley needed balance across the front. Winter was coming. Antwerp's port was still unusable. The Germans were retreating, yes, but not defeated. The war could still be lost through arrogance. And Patton was arrogance personified. The private rebuke. Eisenhower did not issue a public reprimand. He summoned Patton. What happened behind closed doors was never fully recorded, but the tone is clear from those who knew both men. Eisenhower did not yell. He explained. He laid out the reality Patton refused to accept. This was not Patton's war to win alone. It was an alliance, a system, a fragile structure held together by trust and obedience. Then came the warning. What Patton had done would not be tolerated again. Not because it failed, but because if everyone acted like Patton, the Allies would lose. Patton listened. He always did, eventually. But he did not apologize. He believed to his core that he had done what history would demand. Why Eisenhower let him live, career-wise? This is where Eisenhower proved why he was supreme commander. He absorbed the anger of others. He shielded Patton from harsher punishment. He balanced discipline with pragmatism. Because Eisenhower understood something few did. Patton was a weapon. Dangerous. Unpredictable. Often insubordinate. But devastating when pointed in the right direction. Instead of breaking him, Eisenhower tightened the leash. Fuel allocations were monitored more closely. Patton's freedom was narrowed. His advances were restrained not by speeches but by logistics. The system reasserted control. But the message had been sent, both ways. Patton knew Eisenhower would stop him if needed. Eisenhower knew Patton would always push until stopped. The cost of the theft. The stolen fuel did not win the war. Market Garden failed. The Germans regrouped. The Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, would soon prove just how dangerous it was to assume the enemy was finished. Winter arrived. In hindsight, Eisenhower's restraint looks wise. Had Patton continued unchecked, the front might have fractured. Had Eisenhower crushed him, the Allies would have lost one of their most aggressive commanders when they needed him most. The fuel theft became a quiet lesson, not a scandal. A warning etched into the memory of Allied command. What this moment really was. This wasn't about gasoline. It was about control versus initiative. About whether wars are won by rules or by men willing to break them. Eisenhower chose neither extreme. He let the victory stand, and the disobedience die quietly. And Patton for once backed down. Not because he was wrong, but because Eisenhower had made it clear. There would be no more stealing the war. History remembers victories. It rarely remembers the moments where disaster was narrowly avoided. Patton's theft of 500,000 gallons of fuel sits in that blind spot. A moment where brilliance and recklessness collided, and only careful leadership kept the war from tipping the wrong way. Eisenhower never made a speech about it. There was no public condemnation. No court-martial. No headlines. And that silence was the point. Because Eisenhower understood something Patton never fully did. Winning battles is not the same as winning wars. Patton believed momentum was everything. That hesitation was betrayal. That speed alone could crush the enemy. In many cases he was right, terrifyingly right. His advances broke German morale. His unpredictability kept enemy commanders off balance. When Patton moved, the Germans reacted. But Eisenhower saw the war as a living system. Fuel went here so pressure could be applied there. One army paused so another could strike. Egos were managed as carefully as divisions. A single commander breaking that system, even for success, threatened the whole structure. That is why Eisenhower's response mattered more than the fuel itself. The war after the incident. Patton did not stop fighting aggressively. He did not become obedient in spirit. But he stopped stealing. When the Battle of the Bulge exploded in December 1944, it was Eisenhower's control, not Patton's impulse, that saved the Western Front. Eisenhower calmly identified the main German thrust, held his nerve, and then turned Patton north with devastating effect. And Patton delivered. This time with authorization. This time inside the system. The result was one of the most decisive counterattacks of the war. That is the irony. Patton's greatest moment came after Eisenhower drew the line. What Eisenhower never said out loud. Eisenhower never admitted Patton was right to take the fuel. But he never denied it either. What he did was more subtle and more difficult. He accepted the outcome without rewarding the behavior. That balance is rare. Most leaders overcorrect. They punish success because it was inconvenient, or they excuse insubordination because it worked. Eisenhower did neither. He made it clear. Results don't erase responsibility, and obedience doesn't excuse failure. Both mattered. Patton's legacy reframed. Patton died in 1945, before he could ruin his own legacy in peacetime politics. He is remembered as the relentless warrior, the charging general, the man who wanted to drive tanks straight to Berlin. But moments like the fuel theft show the truth behind the myth. Patton did not win the war alone. He needed limits. He needed someone above him who could say no, even when yes was tempting. Eisenhower was that man. Not flashy. Not poetic. Not reckless. But steady. The real lesson of the 500,000 gallons. This story isn't really about World War II. It's about leadership under pressure. There will always be people like Patton, brilliant, aggressive, willing to break rules to get results. Organizations need them. Wars are often won because of them. But without someone like Eisenhower, those same people eventually burn everything down. Eisenhower's genius wasn't tactical brilliance. It was restraint. He absorbed criticism. He tolerated frustration. He chose cohesion over applause. And when Patton crossed the line, Eisenhower didn't explode. He drew the line. Quietly. Firmly. What? The ending history almost had. Imagine Eisenhower reacting emotionally. Imagine Patton publicly humiliated. Imagine British commanders openly revolting. Imagine every general deciding orders were optional. That future was avoided, not by luck but by judgment. 500,000 gallons of fuel could have fueled chaos. Instead it fueled a lesson. Wars are not won by the loudest generals. They are won by the leaders who know when to let brilliance run, and when to stop it cold. Eisenhower stopped Patton without breaking him. And because of that, the Allies didn't just advance. They held together. That, more than any stolen fuel, is why the war was won.